and needs to be known and all the rest of it. Utterly vital in a place like the United States, which is intensely politicised, intensely ideologised. I mean, all these folk who said, just take it on the chin like you would the common cold or flu or whatever, and everything will be cool. If they know that they've got a long-term problem with diabetes, if they know they've got a long-term problem with their heart, their liver, other parts of their body, and that functioning in a healthcare system which is cost-wise out of control, you're going to be finding yourself in a situation where you probably cannot afford it. And you need to understand that this has to be taken seriously.
Absolutely.
Wish we had your information into the States.
The terrible thing, of course, is that if you take America as an example, you've got a very heterogeneous quality of healthcare, some of the best in the world, not some of the worst in the world, but the access to quality healthcare is very inhomogeneous, shall we say. So if you are poor and black and live in the South, you will not have the same access to healthcare as if you're rich and live in New York, right? And of course, it's those poor people that have the worst outcomes as well. And of course, the other thing about things like long COVID in a system like the US, where it's very much related to health insurance, if you're claiming a set of symptoms, the insurance companies say, well, we don't know about that. What's your proof that you've actually got long COVID, as it's often referred to? So there needs to be an objective way of testing that to actually help people get their, what they should get out of their healthcare system. So, I mean, that's very much a secondary part of what we're doing. Our primary concern is about the health of the individuals. But because the system is poor in relation to the information around it, so that insurers will deny access to healthcare, because that's serious implications for a lot of poor people in the United States and beyond.
I've actually thought about that. I mean, that's the pre-existing condition issue in American health insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're coming in having had COVID, you might just not get there.
That's right. Well, COVID, the general rule is if you've got something, COVID makes it worse, pretty much. Right, it pushes you over the edge.
I remember when I used to be concerned about these things as a defence minister, I used to note that in Lyndon Johnson's time, the US, in terms of national effort, the US spent 9% of its GDP on defence and 8% on health. The US now spends over 20% of its GDP on health and 3.5% on defence. It's which is a sign, of course, of huge advances technologically, that there are so many treatments and systems and machines.
But they spend more on diabetes. Americans spend more on diabetes than any other country in the world, but they've still got a massive diabetic problem.
And they've got their system's out of control. I mean, Britain, with its National Health Service, is still only about 12 or 13% of GDP, and that covers actually everybody.
Yeah.
So
I'm a big fan of the NHS. I mean, if you don't matter how poor you are, you can still get treated.
This isn't going away. We're going to have to begin to plan life in a sort of COVID environment. We're going to do better. The vaccines are rolling out, some better than others, but they're all rolling out, and we're all going to get vaccinated, probably on a number of occasions in our life over the next few years. And that's going to control the patterns of it to a degree. But human movement's going to be very much more difficult. And we're going to have to be clever at detection. We're going to have to be clever at immediately isolating the problem. But particularly in this country, we can't operate in this environment. We're a global trader. We live in the globe. You think Americans live in the globe. Well, about 9% of their GDP is in the international sector. In the case of Australia, it's about 24%. And and we are prosperous because we take people in. Until this virus, we are importing 1% of our population every year. If we don't import 1% of our population every year, then we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we slide slowly into poverty, or at least higher and higher levels of unemployment. We are having that concealed at the moment by the vast number of Australians returning home, is driving the prices of housing through the roof and all the rest of it. But I think you've done a piece of work and are getting it patented that might, in part of this process of how we manage our lives, could be very useful.
So, all of the things you say are absolutely spot on. Our contribution is, what we're really trying to do is understand the disease. And remember, this isn't going to be the last zoonotic breakout, right? So there have been a lot of these zoonotic things that come from animals. As humans will live closer and closer to animals, it's more likely to do, these diseases jump. So there's going to be more like COVID, right? Inevitably, with the population the size it is. So our bit is to help, of course, understand how the disease works, how to mitigate its effect, how to stratify people according to their likely outcomes. But there's also a relevance for biosecurity as well. So currently we have a PCR test, right, which is basically sticking something up your nose, swabbing it around, and then testing to see if there are parts of the virus there, detecting the viral genome. But the limitation of that is it's only as good as the swabber. So there are good swabbers and there are bad swabbers. And if you've got a bad swabber, you might miss it. You remember in the episode in the Rose Garden where everybody was swabbed, but 18 or 19 people went down with the disease. So obviously it doesn't work. So we've been developing tests which are, as we say, we're orthogonal to that. They work in a different way. We try and detect the biochemical effect of the virus as it is proliferating in the body. And we think that's probably at least as sensitive and possibly much more prognostic than in just detecting the virus. So one of the ways forward is to think about how you can use these chemical tests on a little blood spot would be one of the things that we'll be working for that will be in addition to the PCR. And if you're negative for both of them, probably okay. And if you are positive for either of them, you obviously have to be quarantined further. But that's, so that's still some time, well, I'd say a year away before we can do that, because you've got to get all these things through regulatory affairs. But now is the time actually to be developing those things here in Australia. Australia doesn't have the burden of a massive amount of disease that's cluttering up all of the health service, all right? So preparedness means looking ahead. And looking ahead, you need to think about things that you need to put in place to help detect the virus, help nail it down. So as the virus evolves and the new variants appear, what you did last week or last month might not be good enough in the future. So we need to have constant information about the evolution of the virus and to inform healthcare policy and actions, and that includes standardisation of the biosecurity measures.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's great to get that rolling out of here. And I hope I'm sure the publications are rolling out of here.
Oh, certainly.
I was certainly hoping that you were going to write a really alarmist thing, which I was going to send to a couple of mates who are working in the American media and say, this is the best centre in the world. Get this published and torpedo your opponents.
Americans can only accept that they have the best of everything. That's the first part of that. But now, being a scientist and being an alarmist, those things do not sit well together. We should be sceptical about everything. But the thing is, with a new disease, by definition, we don't know what it's going to do next. We still, a lot of how it works is still a mystery to us.
Yeah. Now,
firstly, let's just say about the vaccines. It's an astonishing performance of modern science to turn out a vaccine or series of vaccines in less than a year, because it normally takes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years to do this. So only with the current and the incredible technology we have now could we ramp that up to start with. Now, the vaccines, there are multiple types working in different ways on different targets related to the virus. So they will have different performance, and their performance will vary between the variants of the virus. Because what a vaccine is basically doing, it's trying to simulate the virus itself, the shape of it almost, actually, without having any infective property. So if the virus is evolving, this spike protein that sticks out of it is very characteristic, and you want to try and simulate that. If that's evolving, then your vaccine might no longer emulate it properly, so you won't raise an immune response. The other thing is, how long does an immune response last, right? So we're not... Right, so the latest work that's coming out of China indicates that it might be less than a year right? So that before your antibodies go down, and vaccines are for raising antibodies. So if you start thinking about the virus evolving potentially like influenza does, then we need a new vaccine every year. And you need it for the whole planet with COVID-19. Yes. That is quite daunting. So first thing is to say that vaccination is far better than not having a vaccination, because if you do get the disease, right, you're about 1,000 times, 10,000 times, a huge proportion more likely to get very seriously ill or die than if you have the vaccine, right? So there's no argument against it. It's about probabilities. These vaccines look as though they're very safe. There have been very few incidents of any problems with them. They're probably unusually safe so far. And so there is no reason for not getting a vaccine. And the other thing I think is really important is some of these later strains, particularly the B117, the British strain, looks as though it's more infectious in children. So so children do respond slightly differently to the virus. They tend to get less serious respiratory disease. But now in the UK, they're seeing really quite large numbers of children getting it and getting it more severely simply because it's more infectious. And a small proportion of children go on to get very, very seriously ill, about 1% of them, which has potentially life-threatening or long-term effect. So I think the way you feel about the virus and the vaccine is different when you know now that the new ones can affect children more than they used to. That means adults are responsible for making sure that everybody gets vaccinated because we need to protect our children.
We really need to sort of absorb the lessons that you're talking through here. We obviously have one attribute of this which is similar to the flu, and that is you've got to get injected every year.
Yeah.
And it'll be a different vaccine every year when you are injected with it. So people have to get used to the idea that this thing does not go. This thing is now in us, and it is going to be repeating. What we need to do is to work out how we handle ourselves, of course, because we're going to have to open up. We can't operate like this that much longer economically, also humanly, and also in terms of what we need for growth in our economy, in migration, for example. We need to be able to operate, and so does the rest of the world. They all need to be able to operate. So how do we get the constant iteration of vaccines that we're going to need? How do we get people to accept that you're not having a one-off sport? This will do you for the next 6 to 12 months. After that, you're on it again. Yeah. How do we get the healthcare services of the various countries to accept it? And how do we get particularly the developing world? Because it's critical for their capacity to advance that they get properly supported. This is a huge health policy challenge.
And there are no simple answers. We don't know enough about the properties of the disease yet. And this is a step change in our society globally. And the unique economic coupling with this disease, I don't think there's anything that's really been like that in the past. So exactly as you say, we'll transition from a pandemic, which is still not under control, even though infection rates are coming down, to what is something, an endemic disease like influenza. But what we still don't know yet is how many twists and turns the virus will take in its evolution before it settles down to something. So influenza is still a serious disease, but we've accommodated to it, and we have vaccines that are rolled out. But even so, you see those vaccines. So influenza is normally as a disease of sort of like cold and wet weather, right? So it's common in the UK, and it's not really so important in tropical countries. But COVID-19 is not like that. It seems to be able to go anywhere. So the questions you pose are really serious societal issues that impact on every part of everybody's life on the planet.
Well, as it rolls, at least we in this country know that we have a truly fabulous centre with truly fantastic leadership, prize-winning leadership, ultra-published leadership, ultra-cited leadership, inventing things. We're going to be useful to the rest of the globe. And, you know, you'll have found as you've gradually adjusted yourself to Australian society when you've come out